As we all know, AI is here, whether you feel ready for it or not. And that means employees and leaders essentially have to learn how to work with a new coworker and really get ready for AI in the workplace. Welcome to Work Better, a Steelcase podcast where we think about work and ways to make it better. I'm your host, Chris Congdon, and I'm here with our producer, Katie Pace, who is also going to talk with me about this conversation about generative AI. Katie, how have you used AI in your work?
Well, honestly, I'm a little intimidated by it. I know it can do cool things like synthesize lots of information or even create a whole podcast, but it's not a part of my everyday work yet. And I am a little afraid that it is going to be, and I'm not going to learn how to use it, or I'm not going to know how to use it. Yeah. What about you?
Well, I totally get that. And I'm currently using it for different situations, like to help me get unstuck if I'm writing something or if I have a topic to research. So I feel like I'm using it a little, but I have anxiety like you that I need to be taking greater advantage of it. And today's guest, Sean Gallagher, says we should actually be using AI more because not only is it going to make us more productive, but it'll help us be more engaged.
Sean is the founder of Humanova, a consultancy that helps companies solve workforce and workplace risks associated with AI and hybrid work. He's a leading Australian expert on the future of work, focusing on the transformative effects of technology.
Sean led Australia's first study on generative AI's impact on knowledge work with Deloitte, and he created the first generative AI course aimed at enhancing business productivity.
Okay, so before we go any further, can we just start with what is AI?
Well, I think that's a good foundational question because I think we all have different perceptions. And so that's where I started the conversation with Sean. So let's listen there. Welcome to the Work Better podcast, Sean.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. It's great to be joining you from Sydney, Australia today.
We want to talk about the topic that everybody is talking about right now, which is AI. As you know, it's a term that's used pretty broadly. Our level of knowledge for our listeners and just in general is kind of all over the place. So just to level set, could you tell us a little bit about how you define AI, or what are some of the distinctions that our listeners should be thinking about as we go through this conversation?
Well, I think this is a really important framing for our conversation, but also for your listeners, in the sense that the kind of AI that most people have seen in the headlines recently is a completely new kind of AI, generative AI. AI has been around for many years, decades, in fact, and it's that kind of AI is often called narrow AI or predictive AI, and it takes very large data sets and can help predict or forecast, a trend that is evident within that. So it's really great for, say, forecasting weather or customer behaviors or maybe your future sales opportunities. But generative AI is really about creating new content, something that doesn't exist yet. So it generates ideas, or it can help you draft an email or a report or write code or create some images for you. So it really is quite a different kind of mindset to understanding AI, in that it really is about creating something new that didn't exist before.
Well, that's really the anxiety creating part, like creating something new. As a writer, creator, producer, that's the bit that's scary to me. How and when do I use it? And could AI produce an article or this podcast or design a floor plan?
Well, we already know that it's doing a lot of those things today, and so it makes sense. I have some of those fears too. So far, our experience is that generative AI isn't perfect, but it can be used for a lot of things, to be a thought starter or sometimes a thinking partner, when you give it good prompts, which is the tricky part. But it can help take some hard work and get it completed faster.
Yeah. I love thinking about it like an intern or an entry-level associate, right? Writing the first draft of the report that then needs some more work.
Yeah, that's exactly what Sean has to say. We need to think about AI more like a colleague that's coming to help versus an enemy that's coming to replace us. So if you give it a report, it can give you a great summary that maybe it's only 60% of the way there, but you're still going to need to edit and work on it. But Sean says when we do start to outsource that work to AI to help us, employees have better overall well-being and even better work-life balance.
That is fascinating to me. I mean, I see how it reduces the mental load at work. And if you're comfortable with the technology, then your outlook is pretty positive. And if not, there's more anxiety there. Right. And this was like a really interesting part of your conversation. So let's listen to what Sean had to say about AI as a coworker and how it impacts our well-being.
Don't think of it as a technology. Think of it as a virtual coworker or a virtual colleague. This virtual intern is incredibly capable, is highly intelligent, has an endless capacity to do work, but is naive and makes mistakes. And so how would you onboard an intern or a grad or a junior into your workforce? It takes a little bit of work up front in terms of helping them understand how you work but also being able to articulate what it is that you want them to do.
Right.
And so thinking, it's just like onboarding a new colleague, but ultimately it will be about how we're able to articulate and express what we want the AI to do for us.
So let's talk about something that you found about how AI impacts employees' mental health. Can you tell us about that study?
One of the things that we've done here in Australia is I've led a national study on the workforce and trying to understand and measure the experience, the attitudes, the use of generative AI by workers right across the economy in the work that they do. And what we found is what we call high frequency users. Other people call them power users, if you like. So those workers who use AI within their work on at least a daily basis are demonstrating a much different perspective on the future and opportunities that they have in front of them. Not only does it lead to better work-life balance in the sense that it minimizes their workload or helps alleviate inefficient workflows, et cetera. So very much, help get more work-life balance. But on the mental health side of things, there's a strong correlation with workers that are these power users or high-frequency users see, they're much more have a much higher level of job satisfaction. They see a significant improvement in job opportunities, like 3 times optimistic about better job opportunities.
Sure.
But also in terms of their own work-life balance, it really is across the board. But it cuts off really beyond daily users. So even workers that use it from time to time, maybe weekly, they have a far lower optimistic view of the future or the impact on them. And that actually kind of aligns with a lot of research that has been done. From a productivity perspective, the top performance comes from workers who are using it continually within their work, not just sort of reaching for it from time to time. And that also then aligns with a much more positive outlook for mental health, work-life balance, and better job and more meaningful work.
It makes sense to me, of course, that if somebody is like a power user, or early adopter, whatever you want to call them, that they're super excited about it. And like they don't have angst about the technology, they're embracing it. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But I think it also makes sense that if somebody's feeling like, I'm not sure how to use this and I'm not sure what to do, that you would maybe feel a little bit more worried about that and maybe feel kind of AI anxiety. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, there's a lot of fear around AI, and there's probably maybe 4 different dimensions of fear that I would probably talk about. One, of course, is fear of losing your job.
Sure.
The second is fear of maybe using it in your work, and you're concerned that you're going to get caught out from your boss or your
Yeah, they're going to
colleagues.
find out it wasn't original work that, yeah.
Yeah, or that's the other apprehension, right? In the sense that, what if my colleagues find out that I'm using it for the work that I've been employed to do? Are they going to think that I'm less competent
Mhm.
for actually using it? But there's also, I think, a fear generally of the sophistication of the technology. I remember the very first time that I prompted into ChatGPT, my heart rate was elevated. I was a bit anxious, and because I was I was I had a bit of performance
Yeah.
anxiety in terms of is it going to think that I'm dumb?
Yeah.
But gradually getting to build up an intuition, right? As you know, there's no instruction manual that comes along with AI, and the best way for us to build up a proficiency is through building intuition. So through frequent and regular use within our work.
Well, as I already said, I can relate to that performance anxiety.
Yeah, me too. But as Sean says, it's still new and we're just learning, right?
Yeah, I feel like we're learning all the time, every day, with different articles or trainings. And if it's really going to help us in our jobs and ultimately give us a better well being, leaders really need to help teach people and make sure that we're all learning it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I talked to Sean about that, and that was one thing he really emphasized that, learning AI shouldn't be just left up to employees to kind of figure it out on their own. And right now, AI at work is still more employee led. And leaders are kind of taking a wait and see approach, to figure out how it's integrated into the business. But he says that leaders are really critical to AI success at work. So here's what he has to say about that.
Now it's time for leaders of organizations to really step up and to make sure that they've got the right settings in place. First of all, there are three key things that our research shows strongly indicate creating a workforce of those power users. The first is clear and supportive direction from leadership, that AI is integral to our future and we're embracing it. The second is having a policy in place. And that's not just about the guardrails, about ethics and security of data and so forth. Of course, it does involve that. But it's also the values and vision. Why are we doing this? We're taking on AI not because we want to get rid of a whole bunch of workers and reduce our headcount. We want to improve all of you and the work you do. And of course, the third is actually formal training, providing a company-sponsored type arrangement where the basics, the hands-on, the tools, and understanding how it works, but then also providing a little bit more sophisticated education and experience in terms of now how do you begin to integrate it into the work you do. And certainly in the companies that I'm working with, that's very much the approach. And just the light bulbs that go on when workers start to see, you can do that with it. And it's all of a sudden much less of, all the apprehension and fear very quickly begins to dissipate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The more I learn about our training about AI, the more I'm seeing how it can help me in my job. And when we hear from our leaders in IT on how they're applying to AI to help the company, you can really begin to see the possibilities.
It's so true. Like one of the ways that we're exploring using AI in, to think about design is to use it to actually analyze data and look for trends and patterns about how organizations are changing their spaces. So, that can be really helpful for other organizations to understand kind of what's trending at work. And of course, as AI evolves and it's more incorporated into our work, that's obviously going to influence how we interact with our environments.
Yeah, he had some really interesting things to say about AI in the physical environment.
He did. And, he talked about how AI is really going to augment our work experiences. And while there's a lot that's uncertain, we do know that when work changes, the places that we work have to change too.
This is a good place to pick up the conversation. Let's listen in again.
Another thing, Sean, that I'm really interested in is your thinking about how this is going to have an impact on the office, and maybe that it might make the office even more essential to our work, which I think for some people that might be counterintuitive. They might think, well, I'm just on a computer screen all the time now using Chat GPT or whatever I'm using. Tell me more about why this will make kind of a renaissance, if you will, for the office.
I think that's a great word. And I do think that the office is going to come back into a greater relative importance in terms of the work we do. But the future office is going to look quite a bit different to what it does today. I've done a lot of research working with companies in terms of hybrid working. And hybrid working actually is, to me, it's a really helpful framework to understand how AI is going to impact organizations and how and where they work. And if you've set up hybrid if you set it up very well, then the work that your team members do remotely is that business as usual, that routine task-based work, things that they've done many, many times before, can either be as individuals or even teamwork. But when we come to the office under hybrid, that should be much more about dynamic and meaningful interactions with our colleagues. Let's take advantage of having a bunch of humans together in the same room and do work that we can only do when we have that. The work that we do remotely is actually far more exposed to being automated by AI compared to the work that we do when we come together is actually far less exposed. So I sort of see as AI becomes more and more sophisticated, we will see a greater emphasis on the work that humans do in organizations occurring in the office and less so that when we're remote.
So I want to pause there a minute because I want to throw out a different experience. It may be just me, but uh, when I work from home, I'm actually doing it when I need to do deep work, when I need to do deep thinking. I'm my own worst enemy when I'm in the office because I'm extroverted and I socialize. And so I think the work that I'm doing when I'm at home, which is not a daily thing for me. Like that's something that I reserve a day a week to be able to do deep work on. And so that's the kind of stuff that when I'm using AI, that's the kind of thing that I'm doing in that moment. Maybe I need, help clearing writer's block, or I'm doing some research and I want to get some help to be able to do that research. So I can see that kind of work could also be happening in different ways going forward. The way we do deep work might change. Yeah? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really great observation. You're absolutely spot on that wherever it is, and most often it is when we're working remotely, we need the cognitive space to do deep work. And there's still going to be a role for working remotely, particularly for what you've just mentioned. And AI actually isn't automating you out of that. It's actually augmenting you to help you better form a mental model, to understand a concept, or to organize your thinking in a more logical and coherent way, whatever it might be. And that deep work is really important to be done in a space where you're not being distracted by, Teams meetings,
Right.
or all the other digital distractions that go on. So I certainly see that it's not going to be we only work in the office and not remote, but the type of work that we do in those locations is going to evolve.
Sure. And, I'm not saying you can't do deep work in the office. I'm saying maybe that's my challenge, just because of how I'm wired. But this does bring us to a point I want to explore with you a little bit, because I think as people have thought about the integration of generative AI into our work lives, we've thought about the work itself. I'm not sure everybody has thought as far ahead as maybe you have to think about how might that influence the physical environments in which we're working. And so I want to unpack that a little bit. And I know you've done some thinking about it. So I'm just curious, what are some of your initial reactions to how might the physical places where we work need to change to support using generative AI?
There's probably at least four different roles that I sort of see. One of the roles is as a meeting place. It's where you have work conferences. It's where you meet clients or colleagues, where you nourish and maintain or develop relationships between your colleagues, or those weak ties that we often talk about across the organization. The second is that team collaboration, but where it's very much more dynamic, where you're working in an ill-defined problem space and having to converge on everyone's mental model to reach a consensus to figure out how to act and respond to the opportunity before you. That can be ideative kind of work, or it could be responding to a client's brief, all of that. And the third would be what I call sort of business scenario planning. And that's more from an organizational perspective, where, you're having to have strategic discussions, or you're responding to a crisis, or maybe you're wanting to develop some new concepts for products or services that you offer. So again, that amorphous space in which, coming together and, being able to have rich communication from in person. The fourth is, it's a little bit provocative,
Okay.
but there's a couple of things in the news, and maybe some of your listeners have seen them, and I'm just trying to understand what this means for the office. The first is, you might have heard of the Hong Kong deepfake banking scam, where a finance officer thought she was on a video call with her CFO, and the CFO asked her, or in fact directed her, to wire, I think 20 million pounds, or about 25 million US dollars, to a particular destination, which she did. But it was a complete deep fake. It was not her CFO, and both in terms of the video and the audio was faked. And there's also, the concern, as AI is going to become more sophisticated, we may not be always able to trust the AI. There may be some malicious AI that we don't know is listening in and so forth. And I think that maybe this fourth role of the office could be like secure portals, or even Faraday cages, where it's the only place you can have very serious and strategic discussions when you're talking with the people that you need to be talking to, but also the conversations that you have are secure in that space.
Well, I was just starting to feel a little bit better about AI, and now I'm totally spooked again.
Well, I am personally very grateful that I don't have the authority to wire money for the company anywhere in the world, that's for sure.
But to that point, change is happening so quickly. Where do we start, and what do leaders need to do?
Well, as Sean says, we just have to jump in. We have to start using it with our work and experiment with where it's going to be helpful.
Yeah, I'm going to start asking it to help me more, maybe write summaries or, reports, and just see what we get.
Absolutely. I think we should all just try it if we haven't. It really is about a learning mindset.
Yeah, that's similar to what Sean said. So let's listen in again.
Cohorts in randomized control trials, cohorts that have been enabled to work with generative AI like ChatGPT, versus the cohort that is not able to use it within those tasks. Those using ChatGPT can perform a task much more quickly. They can do a much greater volume of work, and the quality of the output is also significantly greater. So there's already data to suggest that the current versions of AI really are going to deliver benefit to you. Of course, leaders are worried about the ethics and the security of data and so forth, and I'm not in any way seeking to diminish that they are a concern. But there's a whole truckload of work that workers can be doing now, integrating AI into their tasks. Formatting a report, or structuring this, or helping me respond to an email, or whatever it might be. And these little time savings accumulate over work. But this technology is, it's going to be different next week and next month to what it is today. And the only way to continue to get the best out of it is to evolve with it and to integrate it into work now.
Sure. So to that point, organizations are really going to need to, if they don't already have it, create a culture that's a learning culture so people can continue to build their skills. And I wonder if you have any guidance or thoughts for organization as they're trying to create this learning culture.
While the technology is currently real, all the dividends are being realized at the individual level, workers integrating it into their workflow. But for organizations to really become enabled by AI, it has to be scaled at the team level. I think the team unit is absolutely critical for making sure that you become an AI-driven organization. And there's a number of things in terms of changing the team culture around that. Psychological safety is probably number one.
Oh, interesting.
Ensuring that workers want to share their learnings, or that they all want to experiment together, that they're learning from their mistakes, that they're able to share use cases and to be able to understand and improve together as a unit in terms of the work or the functions that they perform in that organization. But at the moment, workers are still very reticent to talk about how they're using it. They might say, yeah, I'm using it, but they don't talk about their specific experience. And we need to create that culture of psychological safety where we can be much more transparent and sharing it. It's just like bringing on a new intern, right? Or, making sure that they're integrated into the work that you do.
Yeah. I love that analogy of whether it's an intern or it's a new colleague, it's a new partner in getting your work done. And Sean, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for joining us on Work Better. We just really appreciated you joining us today.
Thanks so much, Chris. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Is your organization thinking about how to create an AI-ready workplace? AI is changing nearly everything about how we work, and soon it will be a greater influence on where we work. Check out the new issue of Work Better magazine to learn more about designing for the AI supercycle. Visit steelcase.com/WB magazine.
All right. I guess our next podcast will be produced by my new coworker, a bot.
Well, I think a bot can be your assistant or your intern, but it was a helpful conversation, and Sean gave us a lot to think about. Katie, can you tell everybody about our guest next week?
Sure thing. Next week, we're talking to Dr. Ben Wiegert, Director of Research and Strategy for Gallup's Workplace Management Practice. He talks about the change fatigue we're all experiencing and why more people than ever are looking for new jobs.
Yeah, I think Ben has a lot of good things to say about employee well-being, and I think he's going to give some great advice, not only for employees, but for leaders as well. If you enjoyed the conversation today, would you subscribe or share it with a friend? You can also visit us at steelcase.com/research to sign up weekly for updates on research insights or design delivered right to your inbox. Thanks again for being here, and we hope your day at work tomorrow is just a little bit better. Thanks to everyone who helps make Work Better podcast possible, including our producers Rebecca Charbauski, Stav Kontis, Chiara Licari, Brandon Lacic, and Katie Pace. Creative direction is by Erin Ellison. Editing and sound mixing is by Soundpost Studios. Technical support comes from Mark Caswell, Sean McManaman, and Jose Jimenez. Digital publishing is by Areli, Arellano, and Jordan Marks.